My name is Pino Cutrone, and my co-presenter is Keisuke Imamura, Dr. Keisuke Imamura. Okay, and the title of our presentation is Examining the Effects of Study Abroad on the Listenership of Japanese EFL University Students. So Dr. Imamura is going to be handing out our handout, okay, so you can follow along, and it has our contact information in there, look at the end, and a list of references, okay, for you to look at if you want to access things. So where shall we begin? Okay, we're going to start off with the key term. Okay, the key term is listenership. So we're examining, the effects of study abroad on Japanese EFL learners' listenership. So we'll start off by defining that. So what is listenership? So I'm not going to, read it, word for word or something. That would be pretty boring. But so I'll just tell you the main things. Mike McCarthy from the University of Nottingham, he coined the term listenership. Okay, listenership is an umbrella term which covers, listener reactions. So if you have just a simple dyadic conversation, two people speaking to each other, you'll have what's called a primary speaker, like the main speaker, who gives the main channel of communication, and then you'll have the listener. But I wouldn't call it the listener, I would call it the non-primary speaker, because they're actually going to be doing some speaking. So some kind of non-word vocalizations like or non-verbal type of reactions like what people are doing now, head nods and things like that. So those are called back channels, and back channels are often synonymous with listenership. But so here I'm using the term listenership to encompass more than back channels. In back channels, again, I could give a whole presentation on the problems of defining back channels. I think I've seen 24 different terms used by different researchers, and they encompass different elements of listening behavior. So we're not going to get into all that. We're just going to use the term listenership to cover the small ones, and the big ones, the nonverbal ones, and the verbal ones. So yeah, I'll move on to the next one. So we've defined listenership as the listener reactions, okay, verbal and nonverbal. Now let me give you a little bit of background about this. So first of all, several studies have shown important differences in listenership behavior across cultures. Some of my own studies have shown important differences. Some of the categories are in terms of frequency, of back channels, how often people are nodding, and giving listener reactions compared to other cultures, as well as variability, the types that they give, the long ones versus the short ones, the non-word vocalizations versus content words and things like that. And then, what are called discourse context favoring back channels. That would be, the placement of where they happen, in the primary speaker speech. If they happen at a clausal boundary, if every time I lift my eyebrows up, then the person gives me a nod. Those are discourse context. The actual, locations of where they happen, as well as function. And I'll explain more about that after. So there are lots of differences. And my focus is on Japanese EFL learners. I use the acronym JEFL. You will also see the acronym SA, which stands for study abroad. So just to kind of give you that information. So there are differences, and these differences can sometimes negatively influence intercultural communication. Okay, so when listenership behaviors are different across cultures, that can negatively impact intercultural communication. So that would be quite important. Okay, so if you know that the differences negatively impact intercultural communication, then the next step would be, okay, why is it neglected? What should we do about it? So in my own study, which I published in 2016, I looked at explicit and implicit learning of listenership. And so I had 3 groups. I had an explicit group, implicit group, and a control group. And we measured them at 3 points in time, before instruction, after instruction, then a delayed post-test, to see if there were any sustained effects. So basically, the treatment groups, both the explicit and implicit group, they showed improvement okay, in this area. So like instruction of pragmatic competence, did help. And generally speaking, the explicit group outpaced. So that means at the delayed post-test, they performed better than the implicit group. Okay? So what are we left with now? Well, to kind of tie it into the theme of this conference, study abroad theme. So there's a growing consensus, maybe a better word is, there's like a growing assumption that study abroad context provide the best environment like in which to actually learn, so-called natural English, like in pragmatic norms and things like that. But we don't know if that's true or not, do we? I mean, we can assume it. Some people have studied grammar, but there haven't been like a lot of studies measuring pragmatic norms in study abroad context. Like, and when there have, they often use discourse completion tests instead of natural data. That's another issue. I'm not a big fan of DCTs. Okay, so what are the aims of our study? Well, simply, there are two aims: to measure the effects of short-term study abroad on the listenership of Japanese EFL university students. And it's important to mention that this, the study that I'm presenting now is the first part of a two-part study. So we're also looking at long-term study abroad, but the results are not in. My students are still away, like in various parts of the world. So when we write it up, perhaps that'll be in the same article or a different article, but that's also part of this study. Like in the second part is to determine the effect of pre-study abroad instruction. So we divided our students into two groups, and one of the groups got some instruction on listenership, whereas the other group didn't. So we just wanted to see what impact that would have. Okay, and going on to the next slide, and it's going to be hairy here. I'm going to kind of go back and forth because there's a lot to explain, and I'm going to reference things that I haven't explained. And so, like I mentioned, that we divided our students into two groups. So we had 20 students. We divided them into Group A and Group B. So Group A, they received instruction, preparation like on listenership, and like in B, they did not. So starting off in the middle, so they studied abroad for 3.5 weeks. So I'm just going to skip forward to this one. So when they studied abroad for 3.5 weeks, just to give you like an idea of the different categories, because we wanted to try to, have like our groups have the same kind of, influence, when they did study abroad. So they both studied abroad in central Canada for the same amount of time, 3.5 weeks. They had the same amount of study, 24 hours of study per week. They studied the same skills. So the makeup like of the class members, very mixed, partially mixed nationalities. Like they had Japanese mixed in with other students, and they stayed in, homestays instead of dorm. So they had similar like experiences, but you're dealing with human subjects here, so you can't say that they had the exact same experience. There's a margin of error. There's, like it depends on students' personality and what kind of, opportunity they made for themselves. So I can't say that, that they had the exact same thing. Then to go back, what they did when they studied abroad. So like at the start, so pre-study abroad like evaluation. So that happened 3 to 5 days before, and that consisted of observations, questionnaires, and interviews. And you notice they do the same exact thing when they come back. That would be like the post-study abroad like evaluation. And then like a month later, they have a delayed post-test, to see if any of the effects like of the treatment, were sustained. And and the tests are the exact same. Observations, questionnaires, and interviews. So what are we referring to when we talk about the test? Well, the organization of the 3 tests. Well, from the Japanese EFL students' perspective, so each participant, conversed with a native English speaker. And like, I don't even like to use that word, native English speaker. I'd rather say proficient, English speaker. I don't want to get into the whole English like as a lingua franca issue, but that could be like another debate. But that seems to be the target, like of instruction in Japan. Not my target, but that is what they look for there. They just like assume that is like the best English, and like it's usually like the British or American model in Japan, especially the American model. So conversations, they would have conversations with the native English speaker alone, in front of a camera. I would leave and they would be like in my office and they would be talking. They'd be given prompts, but they'd be talking like just like as freely, like and as casually, like about anything they want. Like there weren't any rules. The conversations were later transcribed, like, and the categories were analyzed, like the category that I mentioned before. Then like another aspect, so there were 2 questionnaires completed in this study. So one was completed by the students. It was McCroskey's willingness to communicate, which I've used the acronym WTC. So that is like again an umbrella term. That's a really good questionnaire because it's shown to be valid and reliable and covers such sub-constructs as language anxiety, self-confidence, like and other things. So you could get it all like in one questionnaire, and that would determine if students' motivation, like in willingness to communicate, was up. Then there was another aspect, where I used HETS, somewhat dated but still widely used conversational satisfaction questionnaire. This was a group of 3 teachers in my school, native English speakers, who were not part of the study as far as like the conversations were going, but they watched they watched videos of the conversations after the fact, and they gave their assessment, their evaluation of the performances of the Japanese EFL university students. And again, when I say they gave evaluation, they just rated what they thought. Most of the of the questions were on a Likert scale, and there were a few open-ended questions at the end. So they were not involved, and they saw the videos in no particular order. They didn't know who belonged to which group, if it was like a pre-test or a post-test. So we were able to kind of look at what members of the target culture thought. And lastly, after the questionnaire, after the conversation and the questionnaire, then I used playback interviews, or like another term, retrospective techniques. So I hooked up the camera to my computer, and again I rewound, and then I pressed play, and I would ask students questions about their listenership behavior. Like, why did you say yeah here? Did you understand it when you gave a head nod here? Just to kind of see what they were thinking, and play it back, and ask them, and then you could kind of, uncover, what they might have been thinking, and things like that. So, yeah, this is just a quick slide. It's not in your handout, but I thought it would be a good idea just to give you an example of what a transcription looks like. For this one, I followed Jefferson et al.'s conversation analysis techniques, which I think is pretty famous in the field and things like that. Slight variations. So here you have the main speaker, then underneath you have the non-primary speakers, back channel. Okay, so I mean here that would symbolize a head nod. So what would you learn here? Well, you would learn that a head nod happened, during a pause. In the pauses, our time to a 1/10 of a second, 100th of a second actually. And so you could kind of see the patterns. Okay, well this happened, during a phrasal, or a phrasal boundary, that coincided with a pause. And you'd be able to tell things like that. You'd say, okay, well here's a non-word vocalization. And you could count these things. You could see, when they happened at pauses. You could kind of get an idea of what's going on, and you could quantify the data in the observation phase. So like again, we used observations and we used questionnaires and we used interviews. We tried to triangulate like our data to kind of strengthen it, to approach it from many different angles. Okay. So anyway, that's just an example. You could ask me more about that if you want after. The assessment criteria. So how do we decide, like, what is good listenership? Who are we to decide? Well, it's not a perfect science. So like, here are some of the things that we looked at. I wrote an article like in 2010, kind of laying out just what the norms of proficient English speakers are. And we don't just focus on proficient English speakers. We focus on things that are awry with Japanese EFL learners listenership. So like a combination of the two, like in tandem. So approximating the listenership of proficient English speakers in the areas that I mentioned before. Also we thought motivation, like in those kinds of things, like increasing willingness to communicate was an important thing in terms of the questionnaires, like as well as how much they spoke in the conversation, and the amount of full-length questions, like not the back channel questions, like is that so, really, but actual full questions which would drive the conversation forward. And then when it comes to function, using conversational repair strategy. So one problem with Japanese EFL learners is that they will often feign understanding when they don't, like in a situation of non-understanding. If they don't understand, they will often nod. And I know native speakers do that as well, but not to the extent that Japanese students do. They can't recover like a native speaker can simply, and that will lead to communication breakdown. So what do they do in those instances? Do they use conversational repair strategies like, I beg your pardon, or could you tell me what that means? Things like that. And then increasing intercultural communicative competence. There's the acronym that I use. So that is based on the perceptions of the native English speakers who did the ratings, on the conversational satisfaction questionnaire. So we kind of looked at that, and that kind of ties in with Brian Spitzberg's intercultural communicative competence model, and the expectancy principle is what he called it, like to be able to meet the expectations of the so-called target culture. Again, I could talk about that for an hour, but I better hurry. Here, getting to the results. Again, there's so much that could be explained, but I'm just going to give it to you in a general way, in things like that, and you can kind of pick up on points if you want me to explain in the Q&A. So about frequency, frequency of listener reaction or back channels. So in this case, the results, or I should point out that on this line chart, so the red line, that represents the study abroad only group, and the blue line represents the group that received pre-instruction, essay with prep group. So they followed similar paths, between the two groups. So you had back channel, frequency increased slightly, and the frequency stayed within a normal range. So, the results here were basically negligible. At this part, you might be confused, why the number is lower, because how we calculated this without getting too complex, but the number of back channels, between interlocutor words. So, basically, as the numbers are lower, that means that the back channels are more frequent. So that's why you have it going up, when the numbers are going. Sorry, when the numbers are a bit lower there. Okay, so what's interesting about this is that normally Japanese people back channel too frequently. Okay, and so they back channel too frequently. But in this case, they started off by not back channeling that much, which is very, very rare. Japanese are known for their kind of over back channeling, and we try to teach them in the instructional phase to back channel less, and to not do it when the other people are speaking, and things like that. but right from the beginning, they were within like a normal range, and they actually back-channeled more, which is opposite of what you would expect, but it's still within like a normal range. So that was kind of interesting for me. I don't know if that's important to like anyone else, but in the end, that was fine. So the results concerning simultaneous speech back-channels. Okay, first of all, let me define that. What are simultaneous speech back-channels? It's when the primary speaker is speaking, and then the non-primary speaker gives a back-channel at the same time. So it's kind of overlapping speech, which you could argue whether it's an interruption or not. But in a previous study that I did, I ran a correlation analysis, and basically the more back-channels of this type that happened from the Japanese person, the more the British or American interlocutor thought that the Japanese person was being impatient and interrupting them. So it was kind of interesting. So here's the target is that when we taught them not to do this, not to give as many back channels when the people were speaking. I mean, of course, it's not right or wrong, but you would try to not do that. And interestingly, you could see a big difference, between the study abroad, only group. So they did it a lot more frequently, but the preparation, the group that actually got instruction, they did it less. So here's where you would see instruction actually had a positive benefit. Okay. Then the results concerning variability. This is very similar. Again, in variability, there are so many categories here that you could do. The two that I focused on were minimal versus extended back channels. So the minimal back channels would, I could define that as the very short, non-word vocalizations and 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 things like that, as well as non-verbal back channels like head nods, and things like that. So most back channels will occur like that. Back channels are very economical, in conversation, even between native speakers. A lot of them are the minimal type. So when it came to the minimal, they followed similar paths of improvement. They did it less, as far as proportions, and they both decreased after study abroad. But when it came to the extended back channels, and these are these I can define as using a whole sentence, multiple and varied items, instead of just a head nod or they might say, oh, I see what you mean. I mean, that would be an extended reaction, or that's brilliant. Here, something more, using words, content words. Well, here, again, the group, in blue, the study abroad with preparation group, the group that received instruction, they were able to do it a lot more, especially right after instruction, after treatment. Then they went down a bit. Okay, but they improved more. And discourse context. So these are the placements. And again, the discourse context that we focused on were the clausal boundaries. So where did they happen? Well, when they happened at clausal boundaries, so a greater proportion, the study abroad with preparation group showed greater improvement as they sent a greater proportion of back channels at clausal boundaries. So again, this was an improvement. Okay, when it came to function, I mentioned that in situations of non-understanding, in situations of non-understanding, many Japanese people will feign understanding. I've called those unconventional back channels. So when you don't understand and yet you pretend you do, you go or you say, oh yeah, you agree, or you show support for someone even though you have no idea what they're talking about. So they started at the same place. They were doing it almost 100% of the time, but the group that received instruction began to do it less and less, over time. So again, that would be another benefit of instruction. But instead of doing it less, then like the next one is, what did they do in those instances? Well, here you could see, okay, the group that received instruction, like the group shown by the blue line, they were able to use conversational repair strategies much more. They were able to ask for help. What do you mean by that? Or could you explain that? And that kind of makes sense because they were taught this, where you don't even know if the study abroad only group, if they were ever exposed to it, you're just not sure. So in that way, that's another benefit of instruction. And then concerning the WT scores, the questionnaires on the willingness to communicate questionnaire. Interestingly, both groups improved. So you could say study abroad had an impact on their motivation, in willingness to communicate. It didn't matter if they had instruction or not. They both wanted to communicate more just by going abroad. That enhanced how much they wanted to communicate. Then word output, the results here are negligible. They followed the same path. They increased how much they spoke, and then they went down when they received no treatment. So they kind of started to go back to where they started from. Okay, questions. So the full length questions. Well, this is an important one. Here's one where preparation, instruction, really helped them. So you could see them go up there. They're on the blue line. They showed greater improvement as they sent more questions over time. And that would, I think that's a big complaint about a lot of Japanese EFL speakers, is that they don't drive the conversation forward. They take more of a listening role. So that was an important finding, is that they took more conversational responsibility. And the final result that I'm presenting is intercultural communicative competence. Without getting into too many details about how the scores worked, but basically the raters found that the study abroad with preparation group improved more. So they could sense that their confidence was higher, that they spoke more, and they gave them higher ratings. So yeah. Okay, summary and implications. Summary of my findings. Overall short-term study abroad did indeed have a positive effect on various aspects of students' listenership behavior. The group that received pre-study abroad instruction, generally outpaced, the group that did not. So we could see that. Okay, practical implications. So students should study abroad to improve pragmatic competence. It does appear to work. To maximize gains, pre-teaching of pragmatic targets, such as listenership, sub-features of listenership, would be beneficial to students. And then we could have some discussion about theoretical implications. This would seem to support Schmidt's noticing hypothesis, is that you have to notice language to be able to use it, and improve yourself, and things like that. And that would be different from implicit learning and Krashen's input hypothesis. So I will end there. Thank you for listening. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.